There's nothing, quite as loud or as heavily judgmental as a blinking cursor.
Oh, yeah. It's brutal.
Right. You just sit there staring at the screen and it's just pulsing at you like tap, tap, tap.
Just waiting for you to be brilliant.
Exactly. And whether you're, drafting a crucial work email that absolutely has to land perfectly with your boss, or you're polishing up some high-stakes client presentation, or, I don't know, maybe you're quietly chipping away at that novel you always wanted to write in your spare time. That cursor is just staring you down.
And the weight of that expectation is entirely universal because we all intuitively recognize this gap, right? Like the gap between our thoughts and our actual words.
Yeah, for sure.
You know the difference between a sentence that just kind of lies there, dead on the page, and a sentence that actually reaches out, grabs you by the collar, and just refuses to let you look away. The struggle is figuring out the actual mechanics of how to build that second kind of sentence.
Well, today, we are handing you the ultimate toolkit to beat that cursor. Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. We're pulling from this really fascinating source called Good Writing, 36 Ways to Improve Your Sentences.
Yeah, and honestly, forget everything you remember about those dry middle school grammar textbooks. This is not that.
Oh, thank goodness. No one wants that.
Right. This book is uniquely co-authored by a husband and wife team with wildly divergent backgrounds. You've got Neil Allen, who's this former Hart News journalist, and he leans heavily into structure, efficiency, the undeniable physics of a good sentence.
And then the counterbalance to that is his wife, Anne Lamott, who, is a revered best-selling literary author. Her whole approach revolves around finding raw truth, writing from the heart, and crucially knowing exactly when to throw Neil's structural rules completely out the window.
Yeah, it really is a marriage of two totally distinct styles. And our mission today is to extract the best of both perspectives. We want to show you not just the grammar, but the psychology of keeping a reader hooked. How to make your words physically affect the person reading them.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before you can make a sentence beautiful or profound or poetic, you have to build its engine. You have to make it move.
Right.
And according to Neil, the foundational building block of good writing comes down to a ruthless preference for action over stagnation. It is all about the verbs. He talks about his early mentor at a newspaper, an editor named Sam DeLeo, who gave him this ultimate piece of foundational advice. He just said, write with your verbs.
It sounds so deceptively simple, doesn't it? But applying it actually requires this massive cognitive shift because, most of us naturally write with our nouns or our adjectives.
Yeah, we want to set the scene, so we just describe things.
Exactly. But description without action is just a painting. Strong verbs turn that painting into a movie. They propel your reader forward. Anne Lamott provides this great example from her own life that really illustrates the sensory impact of a verb.
Oh, the turkey story.
Yes. So she had this dog named Bodie who managed to get into the Thanksgiving turkey. Now, if you're writing an email to a friend about this, your first instinct might just be to write, "The dog ate our Thanksgiving turkey."
Which is, a factually accurate sentence.
Factually accurate, sure, but completely devoid of life. Bodie didn't just eat the turkey. Anne points out that he devoured, he gobbled, or he wolfed down the turkey.
Yeah, and by simply swapping the verb, you don't even need any extra adjectives. The verb itself paints the mess, the grease on the floor, the absolute panic in the kitchen.
The verb does all the heavy lifting. Which brings us to the ultimate villains of forward momentum. If action verbs are the engine, the verbs to be and to have are basically the parking brake.
Oh, man. The to be verbs.
Yeah. Words like is, was, am, and has. These are, quite frankly, the weakest, most anemic verbs in the English language because they are inherently static. They just describe a mere state of existence, not an action. They basically freeze time.
It's the equivalent of pausing a gripping thriller movie just to show the audience a still photograph of a chair.
Yeah.
It completely kills the momentum for your reader.
Yes.
You're cruising along in a compelling argument, and suddenly everything just stops so you can explain what something is.
And the underlying philosophy of language here is actually really revealing. So Neil studied Eastern philosophy, and he points out that in Sanskrit, there are actually two entirely different verbs for to be.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's fascinating. One is as, which is static, much like our English to be, a table is a table. But the other verb is bu, which implies becoming. It carries this lively forward momentum of existence unfolding.
And English just completely lacks that, right?
Exactly. English lacks that subtle built-in momentum for existence. In English, things just are. So because we lack a word for becoming, we have to actively police our writing. We have to force that momentum by replacing those static being words with vivid action.
Okay, but let me challenge that absolute rule for a second, though. If we are completely outlawing the to-be verbs, we're essentially outlawing the passive voice. But isn't the passive voice sometimes exactly what you need? Like a highly strategic tool?
Oh, for sure.
I'm thinking about situations where you actively want to obscure the action.
Right. You definitely shouldn't eradicate it completely. The passive voice has a very specific strategic function precisely because it freezes the action and hides the actor. It works when the who is significantly less important than the what.
Or I guess more cynically, when you're trying to hide the who to avoid blame.
Exactly. Consider the most famous, heavily utilized political evasion of all time. Mistakes were made.
Ah, yes. The ultimate disappearing act. Nobody is stepping up to say, I made the mistakes. The mistakes just like magically spawned into existence.
Right. And Douglas Adams used this same linguistic trick brilliantly in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. He wrote, "In the beginning, the universe was created." This has made a lot of people very angry and been widely regarded as a bad move.
That is such a good line.
It is. And by utilizing the passive voice, the universe was created, he intentionally leaves out who created it. It makes the entire concept funnier, more absurd, and just more mysterious. So the takeaway for you as a writer isn't to never use the passive voice, it's to take it off autopilot. Only use it when you are intentionally trying to hide the actor or emphasize the object.
Okay, so assuming we have a strong engine built with active verbs, the next step the sources give us is to basically remove the drag. We have to trim the fat. The art of subtraction.
Yes. Taking off the parking brake.
Right. Because if you have a powerful engine, you don't want to weigh the car down with unnecessary luggage. And the absolute heaviest, most useless piece of luggage in our vocabulary is the word very.
Oh, absolutely. The crusade against very is one of the most consistent pieces of advice across all writing disciplines. Neil and Anne quote the screenwriter Tom Schulman. He wrote that iconic line delivered by Robin Williams in the movie Dead Poets Society.
Oh, right, about wooing women.
Yeah. He tells his students that language was invented for one reason, to woo women, and therefore they shouldn't be lazy with it. Like, a man isn't very tired, he is exhausted. Don't use very sad, use morose.
So what does this all mean? The psychology behind that is actually fascinating.
Yeah.
Very doesn't actually amplify the word it sits next to, it dilutes it.
Exactly.
If you tell your reader someone is very angry, you are asking the reader's brain to take the mild concept of angry and manually scale it up. If you just say they are furious, you hand them the exact intensity immediately.
That's a great way to put it. But there is another, slightly more insidious bit of fat that writers constantly leave in their sentences. And that's the naked this.
Ugh. The naked this.
It is a silent killer of clarity. It happens when you use the word this or it without a noun explicitly attached to it. For example, writing "this was hard" instead of "this process was hard" or "this conversation was hard."
Right.
When you leave this naked, you are placing a massive cognitive load on your reader. They have to mentally hit pause, scan backward through your previous sentences, and figure out what exactly you were referring to.
It's the linguistic equivalent of pointing into a crowded room and shouting, "Arrest that guy,"
Yeah.
without describing what the guy looks like or what he's wearing.
Yes.
You're forcing the reader to do the detective work that you were supposed to do as the writer.
Yeah.
It's incredibly frustrating for the person on the receiving end.
And the reason we fall into this trap comes down to how English evolved. Ancient languages, like the Greek that Aristotle wrote in, were structured completely differently. They relied on a system called declensions.
Declensions.
Right. Yeah, think of declensions as these highly specific little name tags attached to the ends of words. These name tags told the reader the gender, the number, and the exact grammatical role of every single noun and pronoun.
So it was just built into the language itself.
Exactly. Because of those built-in name tags, Aristotle could use pronouns all day long. A Greek reader knew exactly what it referred to because the grammar itself held the map. But modern English stripped all those name tags away for the sake of speed. We gained economy, but we lost that automatic clarity.
So we basically have to artificially dress up our pronouns.
Right. You always have to pair this with a noun. Always.
That structural history explains so much about why our brains kind of glitch when we read poorly constructed sentences. And speaking of cognitive glitches, Neil points out another way we accidentally insult our readers, by failing to remove the boring stuff. He warns against the enthymeme.
Yeah, the enthymeme. So, in formal logic, an enthymeme is an argument where you imply a premise rather than stating it out loud. But in writing, the failure is usually the exact opposite. Writers often over-explain.
Oh, like showing all your work?
Exactly. They show every single mundane step of an action, like a student showing their work on a middle school math test. Like, John raised his hand, the teacher called on him, John spoke.
Right, we don't need the middle step. We all know how raising hands in a classroom works.
We do.
When you over-explain, it usually stems from this fear that the reader won't understand you. But by holding their hand too tightly, you just drain the pace of the story. And you kind of imply that the reader isn't smart enough to connect the dots. You have to trust the reader's logic.
Which brings us to a critical pivot. You've stripped out the static verbs, you've deleted the lazy modifiers, and you've removed the overly literal steps. You have this lean, clean sentence. But a skeleton isn't very engaging on its own.
No, it's not.
How do you add the flesh back on? How do you choose words that make the reader actually feel something?
Well, the sources have a very clear, slightly controversial rule here. They say to prefer short, punchy, earthy Anglo-Saxon words over long, abstract, fancy Latinate words. But let me play devil's advocate for you, the listener, for a second.
Go for it.
If you're drafting a major proposal to a client or writing a white paper, don't big, complex words make you sound smarter? Don't they establish your credibility and prove that you're an educated expert in your field?
It is a completely natural instinct to want to armor yourself with impressive vocabulary, especially in a professional setting. But it's a trap. To counter that instinct, Anne Lamott shares a deeply relatable story about encountering the word petrichor in a book she was reading.
Petrichor. That's one of those words that frequently pops up on the list of beautiful vocabulary. It means the specific earthy smell of rain hitting dry soil after a long dry spell.
It is a highly precise, undeniably beautiful word, but Anne Lamott, who, mind you, is a literary icon, a master of the English language, admits that when she read it, it made her feel dumb. Yeah, she had to put the book down, pull out a dictionary, and look it up. And the moment she did that, the spell of the narrative was completely broken. When you choose a $10 multisyllable Latinate word where a $1 punchy Anglo-Saxon word would do the exact same job, you aren't inviting the reader into your world. You are actively pushing them away to prove your own intelligence.
You're just building a wall between you and the audience. And it turns out the history of where our words come from dictates how our brains actually process them. Neil encourages writers to look deeply into etymology, the historical roots of words, because the further back in time you trace a word, the more physical and visceral its meaning becomes.
What's fascinating here is that our brains process physical, tangible objects much faster and with way more emotional resonance than we process abstract concepts. Take the word truth.
Okay.
Today, we treat truth as this high-minded, floating, philosophical concept. But if you trace the root of the word truth back to its origins, it originally meant tree.
A tree, like solidity, rootedness, something with bark that you can actually touch and lean against.
Exactly. And the word writing itself traces back to ancient Proto-Indo-European roots that mean to carve or to tear. Writing wasn't originally a gentle typing on a keyboard. It was this physical, labor-intensive act of tearing into bark or scratching into stone.
Knowing those roots subconsciously grounds your writing.
Yeah.
If you hold the idea that truth is a tree, you start writing about it with weight and texture.
It prevents your sentences from floating away into the stratosphere of academic jargon. And this connects directly to the biological necessity of using sensory details in your writing. Humans are visual creatures, certainly. But engaging a reader's sense of smell or touch or taste, it's an absolute shortcut past the intellect, straight into the nervous system and human memory.
The classic literary example is Marcel Proust biting into a Madeleine cake. The taste of the cake doesn't make him logically recall his childhood. The taste instantly, violently transports him back in time. It's a physical reaction. Yeah. Anne Lamott shares this quote from her young son that captures this perfectly. He was riding on someone's shoulders at night, looking up at the sky, and he didn't say the atmosphere is crisp. He said, it smells like moon.
It smells like moon. I love that. It defies logical, literal translation. The moon doesn't have an odor we can detect from Earth. But as a reader, you know exactly what that expansive, crisp, cool night air feels like in your lungs. It evokes a feeling rather than just delivering data.
Okay, so once you have your active verbs and your earthy sensory words, the next challenge is sequencing them. Here's where it gets really interesting. How do you string them together to create a rhythm that pulls the reader effortlessly from one thought to the next? Neil is a strong proponent of the rule of threes for rhythm.
Right, because the human brain is essentially a pattern recognition machine, and 3 is the smallest number required to create a pattern. A beginning, a middle, and an end.
Like the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Exactly. 3 items in a list feel fully resolved. They land solidly and give the reader a sense of completion. But Anne Lamott approaches it differently. She actually prefers the suspense of just 2 items in a list.
Leaving the pattern intentionally incomplete.
Precisely. 2 items leave the thought open-ended. It creates a slight imbalance, a bit of tension that pulls the reader into the next sentence because they subconsciously want the resolution.
Which basically proves that once you understand the underlying mechanics, your unique voice dictates how you deploy them. To help you figure out what your natural voice actually is, Neil uses a fantastic musical analogy. He asks, which Beatle are you?
I love this part. When you sit down to write, are you naturally a Paul McCartney, like a pure melodist, bouncy, playful, maybe a little verbose, but charming and bright?
Okay. Or are you a John Lennon? A rhythmic, harmonious Stark, a little darker, dealing with the struggles of the world in shorter, sharper phrases.
Or are you a George Harrison? A distant truth seeker cutting through the noise with quiet, profound observations.
Or a Ringo Starr. The steady, reliable heartbeat, providing that pulse and drive that keeps the whole communication moving forward without any ego.
Finding your inner Beatle gives you permission to just lean into your natural tendencies. You stop trying to sound like a corporate mobot or a 19th century poet, and you start sounding like the best version of yourself.
And that natural rhythm is what dictates your sentence length. We look at William Faulkner, who famously wrote a 12,288-word sentence in his novel Absalom. It's this massive, sweeping, record-breaking river of clauses and emotion.
Yeah.
But then you have William Faulkner again in The Sound of the Fury, delivering one of the most devastatingly profound sentences in all of literature, Dilsey endured. 2 words. Or you look at the shortest, arguably most emotionally dense sentence in the Bible, Jesus wept.
The power of those short sentences doesn't exist in a vacuum, though. It relies entirely on the contrast with what surrounds them. If every sentence you write is long and flowing, the reader gets lulled into a hypnotic sleep, the words become a drone. But conversely, if every sentence is short and punchy, it feels like a machine gun. The reader gets exhausted from the constant stopping and starting.
Think about it like building a great music playlist for a road trip. If every single song on the playlist is a sweeping 10-minute orchestral epic, you are going to lose your audience's attention. The mind wanders.
Totally.
At some point, you need to drop in a tight, loud 2-minute punk song just to jolt them awake and reset their attention span. You use the short sentences as punctuation to bring the complex ideas home.
That's a great analogy. So we have mapped out the mechanics and the flavor, but applying this theory is where writers usually hit a wall, because actually finishing a piece of writing is an inherently grueling, messy process.
It really is.
To navigate that reality, Neil and Anne offer 2 rules that frankly apply to almost any difficult endeavor in life. The first is Rule 33, write the hard stuff.
They argue that nothing is truly ineffable. Nothing is too abstract, too traumatic, or too sacred to be put into words. If you find yourself staring at that blinking cursor, avoiding a specific topic or a specific angle because it feels too tangled to articulate, that resistance is exactly the signal that it is worth writing about.
They call it syntactic failure. When you're trying to write something and your sentences keep breaking down or getting clunky or losing the thread, it's not because you are suddenly a bad writer. It is because you are bumping up against a complex, emotional, or intellectual truth that you just haven't fully domesticated yet. Pushing through that syntactic failure is how you clarify your own thinking.
Which leads directly into Rule 35, the ultimate antidote to perfectionism. Finish the damn thing.
Yes. The inner critic's entire function is to protect your ego by convincing you to abandon the draft before it can be judged. It tells you the sentences are ugly, the ideas are weak, and you should just quit.
And Anne Lamott is famous for championing the concept of the shitty first draft.
Absolutely. You have to give yourself permission to just vomit the words onto the page. Let it be terrible. Let it be full of static verbs and naked thises. Just reach the end.
Because you cannot edit a blank page.
Yeah.
Once you have that terrible first draft, then you can move to what she calls the dental draft, going through the entire piece, tooth by tooth.
Tooth by tooth.
That is when you apply all the tools we've discussed today, trimming the fat, finding the strong verbs, dressing up the pronouns.
But the crucial caveat here is that you shouldn't do that dental draft entirely alone. The source material heavily emphasizes the necessity of collaboration. Neil and Anne actually edit each other's work.
Which has to be tough.
Oh, it requires an incredible amount of vulnerability. Anne admits that when Neil gives her edits, she usually hates them for the first 24 hours. She gets defensive, she mentally rejects his notes, and then a day later, the ego subsides and she realizes he was right.
So question for you then, if finding your own unique voice, your inner beetle, is so crucial to good writing, how do you know when to listen to an editor without letting them erase your personality? It feels like a really dangerous tightrope walk.
It is a tightrope walk, definitely, but a truly talented editor isn't trying to rewrite you in their image. They are there to illuminate your blind spots.
Right.
When you read your own work, your brain automatically fills in the logical gaps because you already know what you meant to say. You just don't see the missing steps. An editor only sees what is actually on the page. They point out the confusing detours, and crucially, they cut what Anne calls the show-offy overkill, those $10 Latinate words you threw in to sound smart.
Right.
By stripping away the pretense, a good editor actually allows your true, authentic voice to be heard more clearly. They don't erase you, they reveal you.
That is the ultimate goal. Good writing, at its core, is a profound sign of respect for your audience's time and energy. You don't make them do the heavy lifting of figuring out what you meant. By utilizing forward-moving verbs, choosing earthy, sensory language over abstract jargon, varying your rhythm, and bravely trusting an editor to check your blind spots, you make your message impossible to ignore.
And, words are the primary mechanism we use to process our own existence. Toward the end of the material, Neil proposes a really striking concept. He suggests that a meaning is basically the last square entered in a crossword puzzle. The meaning of an event is simply the sentence that you play back to yourself at the end of an experience.
Wait, a meaning is just the sentence we settle on.
Exactly. So I want to leave you, the listener, with this thought to mull over. If the ultimate meaning of our life's experiences is defined by the sentences that constantly play back in our heads after the fact, could actively editing and improving our internal sentences actually change the meaning of our lives? If we strip away the passive voice, the tired cliches, and the self-defeating language from how we talk to ourselves, do we fundamentally change our own story?
Taking the tools of the page and using them to edit your own life. I love that. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. That cursor on your screen is probably still blinking, but hopefully it looks a little more like an invitation now and less like a judge. Go write something great. We'll catch you next time.